Friends, this is the last session of Kavita Nirantar. Kavita Nirantar as here, but of course, Kavita is Nirantar, so it carries on in all kinds of other venues and books and minds and hearts, and maybe in some of your memory, should you retain such memory. Well, we have had 5 days of poetry reading. This is for the first time, as I told you earlier, that an hour for poetry has been created in this festival. Poetry needs your attention. In fact, perhaps you can listen to prose and miss a bit. Most of us read prose books, not exactly sentence by sentence. We skip. But in poetry, you can't do it. And poetry doesn't allow you to skip reality either, as it appears to the poet. So poetry brings to you, to your attention, what you may have missed or what must have gone unnoticed, whether emotionally or objectively or intellectually or whatever. So we have, well, 2 more poets are coming, but they are busy elsewhere, so they'll join us a little later. We have a mix of people. We have 2 new voices. Yes. And we have 2 old voices, old in the sense, those who have already read here. And 2 more would be coming. This is to fill the hour. The rules of the game remain the same. That is, each one reads for 8 minutes. And we'll start with Nand Bharadwaj, who's a well-known writer of Rajasthani in Hindi. He's also a media person. He has been awarded by Sahitya Academy for his Rajasthani novel and Bihari Award for his poetry collection and Bhartendu Harishchandra Award for media book, etc. He's a media professional and retired as senior director of DDK. DDK means what? Doordarshan Kendra. Yeah, right. Jaipur. So Nand Bharadwaj.
दोस्तों, आपने 5 दिन तक इस मंच पर अलग अलग दुनिया भर की भाषाओं के पोइट्स को सुना और अपने प्रदेश के, अपनी भाषा के लोगों को भी सुना। उस श्रृंखला में, उस कड़ी में मैं इसे एक अंतिम कड़ी कहिए या एक समापन कड़ी कहिए, उसमें आपके सामने हूँ। मैं मूलतः राजस्थानी में लिखता हूँ, हिंदी में भी लिखता हूँ। मेरे लिए कहना मुश्किल है कि मैं राजस्थानी का लेखक हूँ या हिंदी का लेखक हूँ। वैसे साहित्य का लेखक हूँ और साहित्य की अपनी भाषा होती है, वो किसी भाषा में बंधता नहीं है, बंद नहीं रहता। पहले मैं अपनी एक राजस्थानी कविता मूल में सुनाऊंगा, उसका हिंदी अनुवाद भी सुनाऊंगा, क्योंकि यहाँ वाइड ऑडियंस बैठी है, बात समझ में आनी चाहिए, भाषा पर आग्रह नहीं होना चाहिए। मेरी कविता का शीर्षक है सोध लिवी पृथ्वी, मतलब पृथ्वी को तलाश कर लिया, अपनी ज़मीन को जान लिया, उसे पा लिया। और वही पाना शायद हर एक रचनात्मक व्यक्ति की इच्छा भी होती है, उसकी ज़रूरत भी होती है। छोटी सी कविता है, ज़्यादा बड़ी नहीं है। और हमारे यहाँ बारिश का पानी का बहुत महत्व है। यहाँ बेशक JLF के दौरान पानी पड़ गया हो, उसके कारण चिंता हुई हो, लेकिन कुल मिलाकर उसका इफ़ेक्ट अच्छा ही रहता है। थारा सपना में अवसर तो धारो धार, मैं तिरसाई धरणी रो काड़ो मेघ भेतो। थारा सपना में अवसर तो धारो धार, मैं तिरसाई धरणी रो काड़ो मेघ भेतो। बावड़ तो मगरसू थोती थड़ियारे मंझार, थारी जागती इंछावा सपना सार तो अबे तो लीरा लीर वेगी मारी हूस, अबे तो लीरा लीर वेगी मारी हूस, अर मंगसी पड़ गई चवरी चढ़िए चुड़लेरी मजीठ, पण हीचकता आफड़ता आपा सोध लीवी पृथ्वी, आपा सोध लीवी पृथ्वी। इसका हिंदी अनुवाद आप जानेंगे तो ज़्यादा सहज ढंग से इसको जान पाएंगी। तुम्हारे सपनों में बरसता धारोधार, मैं प्यासी धरती का काला मेघ हुईता। तुम्हारे सपनों में बरसता धारोधार, मैं प्यासी धरती का काला मेघ होता, लौट कर आता रेतीले टीलों के मझधार, लौट कर आता रेतीले टीलों के मझधार, तुम्हारी जागती इच्छाओं में सपने आंजता। अब तो चिंदी चिंदी बिखर गया है हौसला, अब तो चिंदी चिंदी बिखर गया है हौसला, और मंद पड़ती जा रही है चूड़े की मजीठ, जिसकी रंगत खिली रहती थी अंतस की कोरों में, पर इसी हुलास में खटते आखी उम्र हमने आकाश और पाताल के बीच खोज ली अपनी पृथ्वी, जान ली अपनी पृथ्वी। ऐसी ही एक कविता और है, उसे मैं हिंदी में ही पढ़ूँ तो आपको ज़्यादा समझने में आसानी होगी। मिनखरो पग फेरो, मतलब मनुष्य जहाँ जहाँ चलता है उसका क्या असर पड़ता है, और शायद मनुष्य के और प्रकृति के साथ रहने से जो रिश्ता बनता है वही इसे मीनिंगफुल भी बनाता है। प्रकृति में भी एक अर्थ भरता है और मनुष्य का भी कुछ उसमें उसकी पर्सनालिटी में, उसके विकास में कुछ इजाफा होता है। मनुष्य और दूसरे जीव जानवरों के पग फेरे में यही तो आदिम फ़र्क होता है कि मनुष्य जिस रुझान की ओर अपने कदम बढ़ाता है उस दिशा की दरख्तों की रंगत बदल जाती है। जिस तरफ मनुष्य अपने कदम बढ़ाता है उस दिशा के दरख्तों की रंगत बदल जाती है। पक्षियों की बोली को मिल जाते हैं नए बोल, पाँव पाँव आती अनथक पीढ़ियों का हलचल, जूझते जीवन में नई आस बंधाती है। अपनी अगवानी में पाँव सीख लेते हैं अपनी पंगत चलना, और दूसरे हिंसक जीव ऊंचे पर्वतों में खोज लेते हैं एकांत निर्भय आसरा। दानिशमंद आगीवान एक मर्यादा बांध देते हैं कुदरत के उलझे क्रियाकलाप की। निर्जन जंगल में रास्ता एक आश्वस्ति देता है। जीव पक्षियों का कलरव यह धीरज बंधाता है कि करीब कई मनुष्यों की बस्ती है। जीव पक्षियों का कलरव यह धीरज बंधाता है कि करीब ही कहीं मनुष्यों की बस्ती है। हिलोरे लेते समंदर के खाली आसमान में उड़ते पक्षी का होना क्या मायने रखता है, उसे एक भटके नाविक से बेहतर कौन जान सकता है। अंधेरे में चक्कर खादी दीठ को जब दिख जाती है उजास की एक नई हल्की सी उम्मीद, संकोच में दबी ऊर्जा को नया मार्ग मिल जाता है अंतस के साध्य का, और यही साध्य सजीवन कर देती है समूची सृष्टि। मनुष्य और जीव जानवरों के पगफेर में यही तो बुनियादी फ़र्क होता है। एक आखिरी छोटी सी कविता है जो मेरे ख्याल से आपको पसंद आएगी, और ये जीवन का रहस्य भी है एक तरह से। पीढ़ियों का पानी। हम बेशक एक व्यक्ति के रूप में अपनी ज़िंदगी जीते हों, लेकिन हम ना तो अपने ही तक सीमित रहते हैं और ना हम अपने समाप्त होने से हमारा जीवन समाप्त होता है। मनुष्य की जो निरंतरता है, जो ह्यूमैनिटी की निरंतरता है, उसी पर बल है इसमें। इस सनातन सृष्टि की उत्पत्ति से ही जुड़ा है मेरा रक्त संबंध। इस सनातन सृष्टि की उत्पत्ति से ही जुड़ा है मेरा रक्त संबंध। अपने आदिम रूप में मुझ तक आती असंख्य पीढ़ियों का पानी दौड़ रहा है मेरे ही आकार में। पृथ्वी की अतल गहराइयों में संचित लावे की तरह मुझ में सुरक्षित है पुरखों की ऊर्जा। पृथ्वी की अतल गहराइयों में संचित लावे की तरह मुझ में सुरक्षित है पुरखों की आदिम ऊर्जा। उसी में साधना है मुझे अपना राग। मेरे ही तो सहोदर हैं ये दरख्त ये वनस्पतियाँ। मेरे ही तो सहोदर हैं ये दरख्त ये वनस्पतियाँ। मेरी आँखों में तैरते हरियाली के बिंब, अनगिनत रंगों में खिलते फूलों के मौसम, अरबों प्रजातियां जीवधारियों की खोजती है मुझ में अपने होने की पहचान। इस सनातन सृष्टि की उत्पत्ति से ही जुड़ा है मेरा रक्त संबंध। और एक आखिरी कविता छोटी सी। मैंने हमारे यहाँ राजस्थान में और ख़ासतौर जयपुर में हाथी बहुत होते हैं, इसलिए हमने हाथियों के लिए एक अलग बस्ती भी बसा दी है। इसका नाम ही है हाथी बस्ती। ये हाथी, इसे मैंने एक पूरी भारतीय जनता के प्रतीक के रूप में लिया है। इतना करार तो बचा ही रहता है हर वक्त हाथी की देह में। कितना भी बलवान हो, कितना भी उसको अंकुश में कंट्रोल करके रख लो, इसके बावजूद कुछ ताकत उसकी बाहर छूट जाती है। इतना करार तो बचा ही रहता है हर वक्त हाथी की देह में कि अपनी पीठ पर सवार महावत की मनमानियों को उसके अंकुश समेत उतार दे अपनी पीठ से बेलिहाज और हासिल कर ले अपनी आज़ादी। इतना करार तो बचा ही रहता है हर वक्त हाथी की देह में। सिर्फ अपनी परवरिश का लिहाज, सिर्फ अपनी परवरिश का लिहाज, उसके हाथों की मीठी थपकियाँ, ये जो महावत होते हैं ना, थपकी दे देकर उसको बुलावे में रखते हैं। उसकी परवरिश के लिहाज, उसके हाथों की मीठी थपकियाँ और पेट भर आहार का भरोसा रोक लेता है उसके इरादों को हर बार। एक अनकही हामी का पुश्तैनी रिश्ता ऐसे ही बना रहता है दोनों के बीच बरसों बरस, वतना इतना बरकरार तो बचा ही रहता है हर वक्त हाथी की देह में। धन्यवाद, बहुत बहुत शुभकामनाएं।
The second poet this evening is Janice Perriott, who's the author of Boats on Land, a collection of short stories which won the Sahitya Academy's Young Writers Award and the Crossword Book Award for Fiction in 2013. Seahorse, her first novel, has been recently published. Now somehow this doesn't list a collection of your poems, so it's not listed, so I can't say.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming. I know it's a lazy Sunday afternoon, so it's lovely to see you all here. Before I read, I'm going to be reading three short poems, and before I start the first one, I just want to give you a little context. So I come from Meghalaya, which is really the other end of the country, and I grew up in a community called the Khasis. And the Khasis were largely, until the mid-1800s, they were largely an oral community. So we had no script. We had no alphabet with which to write our histories. So we preserved and shared our history and our identity and our stories through music and through poetry and through folk tales. And I wanted to write a poem that would capture in some way the musicality of Khasi and somehow to evoke through the Khasi words in the poem some kind of magic. So I hope you enjoy it. It's called Our Names. Our names are old names, unwritten, unrecorded, wrenched from stone, Mao Ngap, Mao Sinram, Mao Plang, or carved from water, Yam, Linka, Pirnai, light as the wind on a white stork's back, which travelled here in summer and rested at Demthring. They aren't carved on our monoliths. The Maubin Na are smooth from relentless wind and rain. We have no letters with which to etch those come and gone, save the sounds of our names we set to music. They aren't embedded in Laukantang. Our sacred forests remain untouched, nor cast down rivers as sacrificial flowers. Instead, they travel with us on our children's backs in rough bamboo baskets heavier than stone. Our names are old names, untranslated, sitting uneasy on a foreigner's tongue, untraceable on parchment, save for stories behind our names we set to music. No names save for old names, after water, and stone, Mao. Where will your history be found, they ask? For that, you must play our music and search for Lom Sopetneng, the mountain at the center of the sky. Thank you. So I had a grandfather who was a gun maker. So he had a gun shop, and he also wrote poetry. So I always thought that was an interesting collision of worlds. They're rather violent and they're rather poetic. But this poem is self-explanatory. It's about him, and it's called A War of Worlds. He made guns, my grandfather, in a workshop slammed against a dirty wall in the rough part of the city, next to the Chinese dentist with fake plastic flowers in his waiting room. All day, he buffed and shaved and sharpened on a table of creased, unknowable wood, hands lined deep with grease and grainy gunpowder, picked at dog pins, rivets, and friction springs, names as harsh as the machines he conjured to kill the wild. I don't know when he had time for poetry, how he heard the music of nature while hammering magazine caps, how he saw the world anew while settling viewfinders gone askew. Perhaps when evening settled and the dentist's droning drill was silenced, with lantern lit and pool of light hid hammer and chisel and knife, he was inspired to place word after word onto paper in a line of carefully polished bullets. Thank you. So the last poem is slightly different. My mum's side of the family is Portuguese, Goan Portuguese. And I visited Lisbon a couple of years ago, and I always thought that when I landed in Lisbon, I would feel this sense of arrival, that somehow I had come full circle and the spirits of my ancestors would make me feel as though I had arrived home. And it was all rather anticlimactic because I stepped off the train and I felt nothing. It was a beautiful place and very charming. But I walked around searching for some sense of connection, and I didn't find it, ironically enough, until I happened to wander into this old church, which happened to be the Church of Saint Anthony. Now, I don't know if you know, but Saint Anthony is the Christian saint of lost things, and people pray to him when they lose people they love, or when they lose a certain thing that they hold very dear to him. And I remember when my grandmother used to write me letters in school, she used to always mark on the envelope SAG, which meant Saint Anthony's guidance, hoping that the letter would reach blessed by him. So this poem talks about my little time in this church, surrounded by old people. Not too many young people go to church in Europe. And I sat there and I felt a connection with just the people in this little church. And the poem is called The Saint of Lost Things. We gathered, the old women and I, in the church of Saint Anthony, perched on the pews as birds on wire, slung across the sky. They flicked rosaries between tree twig fingers. I knotted air nervously into a long scarf of silence. What brought us here this afternoon, when the Lisbon sun beckoned everyone outside? We were apart worlds and ages, wide echoing valley. Such distances are covered here as a flight of seagulls, them and me. We come, our ancient hearts grasping at hope. we stare at liveried altar, heavy with the distinction of saint and toddler, bringing to them our losses, empty and limitless as the sea somewhere heaving behind us. Over sacred stone our grief we scatter. I imagine them lilies each night he gathers in his arms. It draws us here, stark space below us. We sway slowly in the breeze, while fresco walls of redemption dampen, peel, green guilty seaweed. We ignore it, the sound of water lapping, praying we don't lose, as in time, all else, the small, distant ground beneath. Thank you.
Arvind, come on. There are seats for you. Arundhati. Well, now we have 4 poets whom we are going to repeat. You have heard them before, at least some of you. We start with the British poet, Ruth Pardell, who is an award-winning British poet and conservationist, Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature, Poetry Fellow, King's College London, and many other things. And some of you might have heard her or seen her book, 52 Ways of Looking at a Poem. Ruth Pardell.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say what a privilege it is to read poetry here with so many people, poetry so varied, and so many young people, as well as other sorts of people interested in it. It's a real delight. I'm going to read from this book, which is about migration. Migration of all sorts, of birds, like the parakeets joining in, of people, of animals. And the first one is for my young daughter. And because migration is of many sorts, and growing up is a kind of migration too. You're leaving childhood behind, you're going to something unknown. And I wrote this for her when she was a teenager. She was about 17 and going on to new life. It's called Ripples on New Grass. When all this is over, said the princess, this bothersome growing up, I'll live with wild horses. I want to race tumbleweed blowing down a canyon in Wyoming, dip my muzzle in a mountain tarn. I intend to learn the trails of Ishmael and Ashtarte beyond blue ridges where no one can get me. Find a bird with a pearl inside, heavy as 10 copper coins. Track the luminous red wind that brings thunder, and go where ripples on new grass shimmer in a hidden valley only I shall know. I want to see autumn swarms of monarch butterflies, saffron, primrose, honey brown, blur sapphire skies on their way to the Gulf. A gold skein over the face of ocean, calling all migrants home. Well, what I realized about migration is that migration and home are two sides of the same coin, two aspects, two faces of the same crystal. Everyone is going towards a home or leaving a home, trying to find a home. And this is true of the birds just as it is of people. So I'm going to read only one poem now, and it's really a collection of all the reasons why people and animals and birds migrate, why they leave a home, whether it's because you're afraid of something, a war, a tidal wave, a destruction, or because you want something, you want a better life in lots of different ways. If there is food there and there's no food back home. So it's called Time to Fly. You go because you heard a cuckoo call. You go because you met someone. You made a vow. There are no more grasshoppers. You go because the cold is coming. Spring is coming. Soldiers are coming. Plague, flood, an ice age, a new religion, a new idea. You go because the world rotates, because the world is changing and you've lost the key. You go because you have the kingdom of heaven in your heart, and the kingdom of hell has taken over someone else's heart. You go because you have magnetite in your brain, thorax, tips of your teeth, because the grass is green over the hill and there'll be gold, or more likely, bauxite inside the hill. You go because your mother is dying and only you can bring her the apples of the Hesperides. You go because you need work. You go because the astrologers say so. The sea is calling. Your best friend bought a motorbike in America last year. You go because the streets are paved with gold. And besides, your father went when he was your age. You go because you have 17 children and the Lord will provide. Because your 16 brothers have parceled up the land and there's none left for you. You go because the waters are rising, an ice sheet is melting, the rivers are dry, there are no more fish in the sea. You go because God has given you a sign. You had a dream. The potatoes are blighted. Because it is too hot, too cold. You are on a quest for knowledge, and knowledge is always beyond. You go because it's destiny, because Pharaoh won't let you light candles on Friday at sundown, because you are looking for an enchanted lake, the meaning of life, a tall tree to nest in. You go because travel is holy, because your body is wired to go. You'd have a quite different body and different brain if you were the sort of bird that stayed. You go because you can't pay the rent. Creditors lie in wait for your children after dark. You go because Pharaoh has hogged the oil, electricity, and paraffin, so all you have on your table are candles when you can get them. You go because there's nothing left to hope for, because there's everything to hope for and all life is risk. You go because someone put the evil eye on you and barometric pressure is dropping. You go because you can't cope with your gift. Other people can't cope with your gift because you have no gift and the barbarians are after you. You go because the barbarians are gone. Herod has turned off the internet and mobile phones, the modem is useless, and the eagles are coming. You go because the eagles have died out with the vultures, and the ancestors are angry there's no one to clean the bones. You go in peace. You go in war. Someone has offered you a job. You go because the dog is going too. Because the Grand Vizier sent paramilitaries to your house last night, you have to go quick and leave the dog behind. You go because you've eaten the dog, and that's it. There's nothing else. You go because you've given up and might as well. Because your love is dead, because she laughed at you. You go because she's coming with you. It will be a big adventure and you'll live happily ever after. You go in hope, in faith, in haste, in high spirits, deep sorrow, deep snow, deep shit and without question. You pause halfway to stoke up on omega-3 and horseshoe crabs. You go for phosphorus, myrtle berries, salt. You go for oil and pepper. It was your father's dying wish. You go from pole to pole. You go because you can. You sleep and mate on the wing. You go because you need a place to shed your skin in safety. You go with 1,000 questions, but you are growing up, growing old, moving on. Say goodbye to the might-have-beens. You can't step into the same water twice. You go because hope, need, and escape are names for the same God. You go because life is sweet Life is cheap. Life is flux, and you can't take it with you. You go because you're alive, because you're dying, maybe dead already. You go because you must. Thank you.
Thank you. You are here because you are alive, and you will go, as she said, because you are alive. And hopefully you have heard something which makes you feel more alive than before. And we have Arvind Krishna Mehrotra, whom you heard yesterday. He has published his collected poems and had published a photograph of 1973. As you can see, here's the photograph, 1973. You know, we oldies want to show to you that we have been young. Anyway, Arvind Krishna Mehrotra is one of the finest poets India has produced in English in the last 50 years. So here you are, Arvind Krishna Mehrotra.
Well, thank you. You heard me yesterday, so I'm back again. I'll read some very different poems. I didn't read these poems yesterday because, there's some young people in the audience, so I'm always worried about that. But maybe they won't understand. Here is this older woman. These are 2,000-year-old poems from the Gatha Sapshati or the Gaha Koso. And they are all about a woman's sexuality. Anyway, this is a older woman, younger man. And this is what she says. He groped me for the underwear that wasn't there. I saw the boy's fluster and embraced him more tightly. He finds the missionary position tiresome and grows suspicious if I suggest another. Friend, what's the way out? It's again a woman speaking. There are lots of poems on sexual positions, and this is one of them. In the last weeks of pregnancy, she is distressed by her inability to mount him. And the last of these, similar, two more. Always wanting me to come on top and complaining we are childless, as if you can fill an inverted water jug. And this is about sexual fantasies. Let faithful wives say what they like. I don't sleep with my husband, even when I do. Thank you.
Well, we have Aruni Kashyap, who writes both in English and Assamese. He's also written novels. You heard him yesterday, Aruni Kashyap.
So I'm going to read from my phone because there was a little bit of confusion whether I'm coming here or not, but I'm very happy to be back. My grandmother always talks about this incident when Jawaharlal Nehru visited Assam. And when I would ask her what happened, she would tell me the events of the day, and how the village remembers, but she never remembered when he came and what he did. And I would ask around the people in the village, and everybody had different dates and different memories of it. I never tried to find out whether he actually visited Assam and our village in 1947. They tell me that it was 1947, right after independence, but while my father tells me that it was probably not, sometime later. But it was very interesting for me how actually the community remembers it, and how actually my grandmother retold that event so many times, but with different kinds of emotions. So this is a poem where I tried to capture that thing. 1947, Jawaharlal Nehru visits Assam. As the crowd swelled, dust flew in the air like shredded silk cotton in windy February noons. People jostled, smelling like lime, coconut water. By noon, they smelled like rotten lime, their blouses darkened by sweat, dust, anticipation, tiredness, journeys. Our family had used a bullock cart, so the people in the village though the people in the village said it would be wrong not to watch a great man who is almost godly. Housewives are excited like sparrows, putting on their flowery blouses, hanging earrings. They recall the last time they had gone to Hunapur. Grandma's mother-in-law described his long nose, wondering if he could smell flowers blooming in distant hills, sweat, grime, dust darkened underarms. It was difficult to get in. A young girl vomited at the entrance. The security looked on, hesitating to shoo her away, while the mother slapped her on the right cheek, on the left cheek for spoiling her silk dress, her trip, her opportunity to see the long-nosed man. Many of them could see only his long nose, while almost everyone saw his cap. White. My grandma, who was a young, bashful woman then, saw his hand only, about which she talked for years, sometimes laughing, sometimes with bitterness. The next poem is written from the point of view of an insurgent. As some of you know that Assam in Northeast India has been the site of armed insurgency since 1979. And now a lot of those armed rebels have surrendered, had come back to the mainstream. A lot of them have written memoirs and novels. And it's fascinating to read those books, their poems, their experience in Burma's training camps. But I was wondering how they would look back at those years that they spent, the most valuable years, getting training, and indulging in all kinds of terrorist activities. So, and since the question of sovereignty is so central in most debates about the political situation in Assam, and I named this poem Freedom, and this is written from the point of view of this insurgent in 2012. Freedom. We are still waiting to paint your name on the handlooms that weave red flowers into cream white silk. On the emerald meadows sprawled dreamily in the blue sky's embrace. Freedom. We are still waiting for that ship to arrive with your name inscribed on its mast. We still believe your name will be painted in cheerful blue on its sails, which will flutter in the air like the hair of a village girl. In February, when red flowers bloom like mischievous ideas in a child's mind. Freedom, we couldn't write your name. On banana leaves with blue fountain pens, on grains of white rice with needle points, on the echo of our childhoods, on the fine surface of rice husk, on the transparent wings of dragonflies, on their pink, blue, green tails. Women couldn't melt you, shape you, stud you with gems to hang them from their soft earlobes. Men couldn't wrap you around in strips of newsprint like tobacco, like light one end, take a drag, reclining dreamily against tree trunks, peel you like ripe mangoes. No, you couldn't even be the walking stick of gray-haired ones or a drop of water on your tongue before the final breath. We couldn't usher you in. We couldn't make you sit on wooden dining tables, serve you an elaborate meal, though we waited for long, with doors ajar, clothes washed, verandas mopped with fragrant water, or with cow dung blended with white soil brought from the river banks. But here, on the wide banks of the Brahmaputra, you were defined everywhere. On the ruddy rivers, where instead of fishes, chopped limbs stuck in the nets of fishermen, where fingers with and without nails scooped up by a woman who went to wash dishes in the stream that ran behind her house. Often, freedom was written between the legs of women, left bleeding on the penises of men who only spewed white froth from their mouth, not information. Freedom, we are still waiting for your arrival. Until then, you will be performed and explained because ancient stories tell us definitions have always belonged to definers. So in Assamese, when somebody dumps you while you are dating, it's called latkwa. So there's a whole genre of latkwa poems, premot latkwa we say. So I was also dumped in undergraduate. I was dating someone and she dumped me in between. So I was very heartbroken, and this is a really old poem, but I like it. So I'm going to read it out. It's the last poem. Nothing will happen between us. Nothing will happen between us Another day will come with paintings all around. On many such days, with poetry about love, about home, about you. Sometimes me, sometimes us. And people will come, will find meanings in paintings, in poems, and nothing will happen amidst these happenings between us. Nothing will happen between us. A quiver of songs you promised to draw for me and write for you, I promised, so that something does happen between us. Through the night when he could write the saddest lines, I wanted to speak out aloud about writing. Someday in these red brick buildings, history stained, about my happiest moments, so that something does happen between us. But nothing will happen between us. Emotions will be melted down to poetry, to paintings. They will come shaking heads, hands, admiring, analyzing, flirting with you. And I would look from a distance, just the way poetry comes to me from some unknown distance, or the way I feel when see the images, hear the voices, and know a poem is descending, ascending over my body, vibrating like leaf tips in a squall, breaking birds' nests, stripping pre-spring trees. Trees will stand nude, ode to a beautiful nude. Someone would ride like him. Someone would draw, someone would paint. Summer parched peacocks will sing songs mournful like foxes meeting in midnight's moony, and yet nothing will happen between us. We would promise a palm full of songs to present each other and drift apart like clouds blocking the moon. During windy winters chilly under quilts, nothing will happen between us. Thank you.
Well, since we have two from that part of the world, I must tell you 15 years ago, or 20 years ago, I was invited to inaugurate the annual convention of Assam Sahitya Sabha. And this is the largest crowd in my life I have addressed. It was 2.5 lakh people. We are very thrilled in Jaipur Literature Festival that 2 lakh footfalls or whatever in 5 days. There on the single day, there were 2.5 lakh people. The pandal ran, I don't know, almost half a mile. And all of these people have assembled there because of the love of their language, Assamese. Well, now we have Arundhati Subramaniam, who just won the award yesterday, the first Khushwant Singh Poetry Award. She is one of the finest poets writing in not only English in India. That she happens to write in English is fine, but she is an important Indian poet. Arundhati Subramaniam.
No, I don't. No, I should have brought it. Thank you, Ashok. And because of the poems that Ruth read today, I'm actually inclined to read from my earlier collection. Can you hear me? Yeah? I'd like to read 2 poems from an earlier collection called Where I Live, which came to mind when Ruth read, because it is a collection about the gap between where I live and where I belong. I'm not quite sure where I belong, but I'm quite sure of where I live and where I do not want to belong. So the poems seem to keep coming back to that set of concerns. I'd like to start with a poem called Home. And I'm not sure whether it's because I live in a country that's always being reminded of its centuries-old history. But there are times when I've wanted a sense of belonging that doesn't seem weighed by the cargo of tradition, of the past. Home. Give me a home that isn't mine, where I can slip in and out of rooms without a trace, never worrying about the plumbing, the color of the curtains, the cacophony of books by the bedside. A home that I can wear lightly, where the rooms aren't clogged with yesterday's conversations, where the self doesn't bloat, to fill in the crevices. A home like this body, so alien when I try to belong, so hospitable when I decide I'm just visiting. And the second poem is a rage poem, which I must confess I enjoy reading every now and then. It's a poem addressed to a Welsh critic. I don't usually write poems to critics, but this poem became a peg to talk about all kinds of annoyances. It's ostensibly to a Welsh critic, but it could be addressed to any of the voices around us that all of us are familiar with, voices that are constantly legislating on identity, voices that are constantly telling us how to belong, whether it's how to be woman, how to be modern, post-colonial, Hindu, Muslim, whatever. To the Welsh critic who doesn't find me identifiably Indian. You believe you know me, wide-eyed, Ing-lit type, from a sun-scalded colony, reading my Keats, or is it yours, while my country detonates on your television screen? You imagine you've cracked my deepest fantasy, oh, to be in an Edwardian vicarage, living out my dharma with every sip of dandelion tea, and dreams of the weekend jumble sale. You may have a point. I know nothing about silly mid-offs. I stammer through my Tamil, and I long for a nirvana that is hermetic, odor-free, bottled in Switzerland, money back guaranteed. This business about language, how much of it is mine, how much yours, how much from the mind, how much from the gut, how much is too little, how much too much, how much from the salon, how much from the slum, how I say verisimilitude, how I say brahadaranyaka, how I say varaparam. It's all yours to measure. The pathology of my breath, the halitosis of gender, my homogenized plosives about as rustic as a mouth-freshened global village. Arbiter of identity, remake me as you will. Write me a new alphabet of danger, a new patois to match the chola bronze of my skin. Teach me how to come of age in a literature you've bark scratched into scripture. Smear my consonants with cow dung and turmeric and godhuli. Pity me, sweating, rancid, on the other side of the counter. Stamp my papers, lease me a new anxiety. Grant me a visa to the country of my birth. Teach me how to belong the way you do on every page of world history. Thank you.
Well, friends, sadly, we come to the end of the hour and also end of the Kavita Nirantar for 5 days. We do hope that some of you, when you go back, feel happy, enriched, uplifted for being here. Of course, the dust and tumble of every day will soon take over, and perhaps you will forget all these poets and all the poems that you have heard. But perhaps some words, some phrases, some resonances, some memories would be retained by you. And maybe some of you would start looking afresh at others, at reality in which you have been thrown in, and start wondering how beautiful, how enduring, and how insufferable the world is. Thank you very much. Oh, I don't thank my fellow poets. So I thank them being here, and perhaps there will be some greetings from the organizers.
Well, Ashokji, thank you once again for moderating a wonderful poetry session. And we'd just like to say thank you so much once again to our speakers, and we have a small token of appreciation for them. Please give them a round of applause.